Hello and welcome. How united is Iran's leadership over the country's way forward politically and socially? It's been a year since Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was confirmed for a second term in a controversial and disputed presidential election, and the opposition seems to have faded from view. At the time, many who questioned the outcome took to the streets in mass protests and became known as the Green Movement under the guidance of opposition candidate Mir Hossein Mousavi. In the days that followed, the unrest was quelled by security forces, leading to mass detentions and a number of executions. Scores of people are still in jail. In the run-up to this year's anniversary, Iran's two main opposition leaders have bowed to government warnings and called off plans to hold a rally in Tehran. While there's a feeling that the Green Movement has lost momentum, some Iranians seem more concerned with the country's rising inflation and unemployment than they are with the imprisonment of pro-reform political figures. A fourth round of sanctions has just been imposed on Iran by the UN Security Council, creating further concern that ordinary people may be affected. What impact the international restrictions will have on the political landscape is still unclear. On today's show, we ask, a year after visible street protests were quelled, is Iran politically stable, and what direction is it taking in moving forward? Join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email, and we also welcome your phone calls onto the show too. Joining me from Boston is Kaveh Afrasiabi, a former consultant to the UN's Dialogue Among Civilizations and a former professor of political science at Tehran University. He's also the author of After Khomeini, New Directions in Iran's Foreign Policy, and he's vocal in his support of President Ahmadinejad's foreign policies. And from Geneva, we welcome Hadi Ghami, an advocate for political reform in Iran. He is the director of the International Campaign for Human Rights in Iran, which has become one of the leading groups reporting and documenting human rights violations in that country. Gentlemen, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you.
Dr. Afrasiabi, if I could start with you, sir, you see this latest round of sanctions as setting the stage for what you call a spiral of tension. Where do you see that spiral going? What do you expect the outcome to be?
Well, I suppose you're referring to my article in Asian Times quoting the Brazilian representative who castigated the UN Security Council for rushing to sanctions and pretty much ignoring the nuclear swap deal that was brokered by Brazil and Turkey. And I concur with that Brazilian diplomat that this is really a prelude to more coercive diplomacy and perhaps worse than that, military strike against Iran. And the diplomat drew comparisons between the Iran case and Iraq prior to the 2003 invasion. And I think there are striking resemblances between the two that one must be wary of and take into consideration in order to adopt prudent policies in Washington and other Western capitals that have really turned a blind eye to Iran's goodwill and its sincere efforts to achieve a breakthrough in the nuclear stalemate by accepting the IAEA proposal for a nuclear swap deal, which was welcomed by President Obama himself.
Now, Dr. Afrasiabi, if I could ask you, how do you think the people of Iran regard the sanctions, the fact that they've been renewed, a fourth round now?
Well, I was recently in Iran attending a couple of conferences and had the opportunity to speak with a lot of Iranians, not just in Tehran, but a number of other towns around Iran. And, Iranian people are very nationalistic and they totally oppose sanctions or any kind of external threats or pressure against Iran, and they consider Iran's civilian nuclear program a national right. And those advocates of human rights who chummy with the neocons behind the United Against Nuclear Iran and so forth should take this into consideration, the fact that Iranians have a national right to nuclear energy and that's being deprived of them, and there are coercive attempts by the Western bullying powers to do so.
Now, Hadi Ghami, I want to welcome you in the show here as well. Thanks for joining us. And I wonder what your take on the sanctions is. I know a lot of people outside Iran, the Iranian expat population and those who are looking for change have sort of supported the idea of sanctions, but there is this idea that sanctions might push the people to further support for the current government.
Yes, that's for sure. Usually one reaction domestically when a country comes under foreign pressure. The problem I have with sanctions is that they have never really produced desired results. And in the case of Iraq, of course, the 10 years of sanctions that country was under devastated the domestic infrastructure, the social economic infrastructure, and really didn't affect the political grip of the government. But at the same time, I think the Iranian government has really waited too long to accept the nuclear enrichment deal of transferring the low-enriched uranium out of the country. They already were engaged in October, and they waited till March, till the very last minute, when the Security Council members had moved pretty surely in that direction. But I am very concerned that the sanctions could be putting us on a slippery slope toward a direction that we don't want to see, which is the military confrontation.
Well, Dr. Kami, let me ask you what happened to Barack Obama's talk early on, especially of engaging Iran without preconditions, as he put it?
Well, I think he tried. He tried. Definitely, if you remember his famous New Year message of March 2009 to the Iranian people, he exchanged several private letters with the Iranian leaders. And then everything just got turned upside down with the events after the elections. Everybody assumed that the Iranian leadership is in control of the country and can move forward in such a historically important development, which would be after 30 years to negotiate and talk to the United States. Unfortunately, the domestic situation appears to signal that the government does not have that kind of support, and there is not consensus within the Iranian leadership to be able to have constructive dialogue with the U.S. And the U.S. has been under a lot of pressure to change its tack and deal with the nuclear issue sooner than later, and that has what pushed Obama toward the sanctions right now.
Dr. Afrasiabi, if I could ask you to address a question from a viewer that came in. Yasin Hassan wrote in saying, sanctions will not convince Iran to give up enrichment. Sanctions are just a stepping stone to the UN Security Council's ultimate goal, a US-Iran military confrontation pushed by the American-Israeli lobby. Do you think isn't that a bit cynical, really, that it's taking that kind of view?
Well, I think it's realistic cynicism, because if you look at the pattern of behavior of the Obama administration toward Iran, there was a feeble attempt at the outset for limited engagement that didn't pan out, mainly because the Obama administration speaks with several voices, and it's very incoherent when it comes to Iran, and it's under intense pro-Israel lobby pressure and so forth. And I think that when you look at the Iranian reaction to the Obama administration, President Ahmadinejad congratulated his victory. President Obama never bothered to respond to that. And President Ahmadinejad, sure, took several months for Iran to accept the nuclear deal, but now the White House has turned around, reneged on their acceptance of the IAEA proposed deal, and now they're setting preconditions for the Iranian swap deal, which is really a humanitarian issue, because the radioisotopes by the Iranian reactor provides for some 200 plus hospitals across Iran, and to deny that to Iran is the gravest infringement on Iranian human rights.
Let me bring in Dr. Kami here and ask a question that came up from our viewers, looking, of course, at a year on since the election results and the Green Movement, and a lot of people feeling the Green Movement has sort of faded. This question from that we got from Facebook from a viewer by the name of DAD says, was the Green Movement truly politically motivated, or simply a bunch of youth marching on the road?
No, the Green Movement, I would describe it as a civil and human rights movement, something that is that manifestation of a desire that has been nearly a century old in Iran, and that means having an accountable government, having a government that's elected by its people and basically serves the purpose of the population and tolerates dissent and critical points of view and does not put them in prison, does not torture them, does not open fire on them on the streets. So the Green Movement was the culmination of many of these desires which have a long history within Iranian society, and the elections really provided that moment for it to come to the fore. And as we saw on the streets, hundreds of thousands of people peacefully, I want to emphasize the peaceful nature of this movement and the extreme violence the government has used to confront it. And that is the disparity we see, and that is why we don't see the Green people on the street right now, because of that extreme repression and violence.
Well, we've got Max on the phone from Belgium with a question. Max, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, I would like to ask how long we need to continue to be threatened by the Iranian regime and their own people, the Iranian, which is a lovely people. I was in Iran in '72 as a boy, and really I enjoy being there every moment. My father designed a lot of refineries there.
Right.
And I don't know what happened to the Iranians. I really don't understand.
So Max, you're saying how long should Iran continue to be threatened by the US dictates? Is that what you were asking?
Iran will dictate us, I believe,
It's a very bad line. Max, I'm going to have to drop the call there, unfortunately. Actually, let me ask Dr. Afrasiabi then, in terms of what change has come a year on from the election, what the outcome of the protests and some kind of, obviously indication of some civil desire for change, what has that resulted in terms of change in the political direction of Iran?
Well, to be honest with you, a lot of people that took part in the street demonstrations are not convinced that the Green Movement leadership, specifically Mr. Mousavi and Mr. Keroubi, called the wrong shot without presenting any viable evidence claiming rigged elections. And a year later, there's no viable evidence to corroborate that, and I've written several articles to that effect. And I think that one of the reasons why the Green Movement has faded is because a lot of people are disillusioned with the leadership that put the cart before the horse, and a year later has not provided any viable evidence to back up its wild claims. Mr. Ahmadinejad is very popular because he's an economic populist. He has provided a lot of support, welfare programs for the working classes and so forth, and that was one reason why he won. And unfortunately, some of these so-called human rights activists who a day after the election, went on CNN and so forth and barked about wrong elections and stolen elections, have not bothered to present one solid article to corroborate their claims. And I'm here addressing your guest who has done that and has gone on a rampage about the stolen elections without bothering with the fact that Mr. Ahmadinejad won fair and square in an election that was very competitive and so forth. And that is a very key issue 1 year later.
We're going to get a response from Hadi Kami in just a second. We have to take a short break now. When we come back, we'll be asking also, has Iran's nuclear standoff with the international community boosted President Ahmadinejad's popularity as the Green Movement's appeal may have diminished? More of our discussion in a moment. We'll be right back.